I inherited my grandfather's house, where I discovered his broken clock was communicating with me, leading me to a secret he believed was too dangerous for the world. It's a strange thing, inheriting a life. Not the big, dramatic inheritance you see in films with lawyers and stern-faced relatives, but the quiet, creeping kind. The kind where you find yourself standing in the silent house of someone who is gone, surrounded by the ghosts of their everyday routines. For me, that was my grandfather's house. He'd passed away 6 months prior, leaving me, his only grandchild, a 2-story cedar-sided home filled with a lifetime of accumulated memories and dust. Moving in felt less like a new beginning and more like stepping into a story halfway through. The air was thick with the scent of old books, pipe tobacco, and something else, something uniquely him. Every creak of the floorboards was a conversation I could no longer have. I spent the first few weeks just existing. I slept in his old bed, I drank coffee from his favorite chipped mug, and I tried to ignore the suffocating silence that had replaced the sound of his low, rumbling laughter. The centerpiece of this quiet kingdom was the grandfather clock in the living room. It was a monstrous, beautiful thing, dark mahogany, carved with intricate patterns of oak leaves and acorns, its brass pendulum forever still behind a pane of beveled glass. It hadn't worked in the 27 years I'd been alive. My grandfather used to say its heart had stopped the same day Grandma's did, a sentiment I'd always found tragically romantic. It was just a piece of furniture now, a silent monument to a timekeeper that had given up on time. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. It was a Tuesday, late into the night, the house wrapped in the kind of profound silence that only the countryside can offer. I was drifting off on the sofa, a half-read book slipping from my fingers, when a single, resonant chime echoed through the house. It wasn't a loud, startling noise, but a deep, clear tone that seemed to vibrate in my bones. My eyes snapped open. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering against my ribs, and stared at the clock. Its pendulum was as still as ever. The hands were frozen at 4:17, just as they always had been. I must have imagined it. Stress, grief, the tricks an old house plays on a new, lonely resident. I convinced myself of it, and eventually fell into a restless sleep. But then it happened again 2 days later. This time it was 3 chimes in a quick, melodic succession. I was in the kitchen making lunch, and I dropped a glass, shattering it across the linoleum floor. I sprinted into the living room, my breath catching in my throat. The clock stood silent and stoic, a picture of inactivity. There was no rational explanation. The next day, I called a horologist, an old man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and fingers stained with oil. He spent an hour tapping and peering into the clock's innards before turning to me with a shrug. The mechanism was a wreck, he said, rusted solid in places, the gears seized, the chime hammers frozen with hardened grease. It would take a miracle, he'd muttered, for this thing to ever make a sound again. He charged me €50 for the consultation and left me standing there, the silence in the room feeling heavier and more menacing than before. The chimes started to become a regular, albeit unpredictable, feature of my life. They were never on the hour, never followed a pattern I could discern. Sometimes it would be a single, solitary note in the middle of the afternoon. Other times, a complex, almost musical phrase in the dead of night that would wake me from a deep sleep. I started to feel a creeping sense of dread, the unease of living with the inexplicable. My logical mind was at war with what I was experiencing. I wasn't just hearing things, this was real. The chimes began to feel less random. I started to notice coincidences. One evening, I was frantically searching for my car keys, already late to meet a friend. I'd emptied my pockets, my bag, and was on the verge of tearing the sofa cushions apart when the clock let out 2 sharp, distinct chimes. Bong, bong. Annoyed and on edge, I slammed my hand down on a stack of my grandfather's old newspapers destined for recycling. My fingers brushed against something hard and metallic tucked between the pages. The keys. A jolt went through me, a cold shock of adrenaline. It could be a coincidence. It had to be. But a week later, I was sorting through a box of old family photos, feeling a wave of grief washing over me as I looked at a faded picture of my grandmother, a woman I'd barely known. As I stared at her smiling face, the clock began to play a gentle 5-note melody, a soft and lyrical tune that felt achingly familiar. And then it hit me. It was the lullaby she used to hum to me when I was a toddler, a memory buried so deep I didn't even know I had it. Tears streamed down my face, a mix of sorrow and a new, burgeoning fear. The clock wasn't broken. It was something else. It was communicating. I began to document it, scribbling in a notebook like a mad scientist. Time of day, number of chimes, the melodic pattern, and what was happening at that exact moment. The journal entries were a testament to my fraying sanity. 2:13 p.m., 1 chime, found Grandpa's missing fountain pen in the study. 11:42 p.m., 4 chimes, fast and agitated. A loud bang from outside, a deer had run into the fence. 6:01 p.m., 7 chimes, slow and sad. I was looking at the last birthday card he ever sent me. The clock seemed tied to my thoughts, my memories, and the very environment around me. It was a silent observer that chose its moments to speak. The true turning point came last night. The loneliness had been particularly acute, a heavy blanket I couldn't shrug off. I was sitting on the floor in front of the clock, a glass of wine in my hand, staring at the motionless brass pendulum. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was drunk, maybe I was just broken, but I started talking to it. I told the clock how much I missed him, how lost I felt in this big empty house, how I wished I could have just one more conversation, one more piece of advice. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the clock's face, my shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a long time, the only answer was the familiar, oppressive silence. And then it began. It wasn't a chime or a simple melody. It was a symphony. A long, complex, and impossibly intricate cascade of notes filled the room. A piece of music so full of sorrow and love and longing that it felt like a direct response, a musical embrace from the past. The very air in the room seemed to hum with the vibration. As the final, heartbreakingly beautiful note faded into nothing, a sound I had never heard before cut through the silence. A soft but distinct click echoed from the base of the clock. I pulled my head back, my eyes wide with disbelief. A small, seamlessly integrated wooden panel, a secret compartment I never could have imagined existed, had just popped open. My hand trembled as I reached inside, my fingers closing around something cold, metallic, and impossibly real. My breath hitched, and for a long moment, I could only stare into the small, dark cavity. The world seemed to shrink until it contained only me, the silent clock, and the secrets it had held for who knows how long. My trembling fingers closed around the objects. The key was heavier than it looked, made of tarnished brass and intricately designed, its head shaped like a stylized songbird with wings outstretched. It felt warm against my skin, as if holding a residual spark of life. The parchment was brittle with age, folded into a tiny, neat square. I carried them over to the dim light of the desk lamp, as if they were holy relics. With painstaking care, I unfolded the note. The handwriting was my grandfather's, the familiar, elegant cursive sloping across the yellowed paper. It wasn't a long letter, just a few lines that managed to both clarify everything and deepen the mystery to an impossible degree. "My dearest grandchild," it began, "if you are reading this, then the old sentinel has finally spoken to you. I am sorry for the secrecy, but some things cannot be explained, only experienced. This clock does not measure the passing of hours, it measures the truth in them. It resonates with memory, with intention, with what is lost and what is sought. It is a compass, not a timepiece. The key is not for the clock itself, but for what the clock protects. Don't try to force the way, that is not its nature. You must listen. Listen when it tells you where to look." I read the words again and again, a dizzying mix of awe and bewilderment swirling in my head. A compass for truth? What the clock protects? It was the poetic, maddeningly vague way my grandfather had always spoken, a trait I'd found charming in life, but deeply frustrating now. The clock remained silent, its great performance seemingly over, leaving me alone with its cryptic aftermath. The next few days were a blur of frantic, fruitless searching. Armed with the strange songbird key, I became an archaeologist in my own home. I tried it on every lock I could find. The heavy oak front door, the roll-top desk in the study, the dusty trunks in the attic, even the small rusted padlock on the garden shed. Nothing. The key turned in none of them. I felt a rising tide of frustration. The house that had once felt like a comforting cocoon of memories now felt like a prison of secrets. I tapped on walls, listening for hollow sounds. I lifted the corners of old rugs, searching for hidden hatches. I ran my fingers along every inch of the carved mantelpiece and the massive built-in bookshelves. The silence from the clock was unnerving. It had given me this tantalizing clue and then fallen completely mute, leaving me to stumble around in the dark. It felt like a test, and I was failing miserably. I was so focused on the key and the idea of a physical lock that I'd forgotten the most important part of my grandfather's note: you must listen. After 3 days of turning the house upside down with nothing to show for it but dusty hands and a sore back, I finally surrendered. Exhausted and defeated, I collapsed into the worn armchair facing the clock, the brass key clutched tightly in my hand. I just sat there, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the window, and I let the quiet of the house settle over me once more. I didn't ask for a sign this time. I just waited. I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake by a sound. It wasn't the powerful melodic chime from before. This was different. It was a soft, gentle, and perfectly rhythmic two-note sequence. A high note, then a low note. Ding-dong, ding-dong, over and over, like the slow, steady beating of a heart. It was the most conventional sound the clock had ever made, and yet it felt more profound than any of the complex melodies. It was calm, it was patient, it was insistent. I sat up, my eyes scanning the room. The sound filled the space, a gentle, pulsing guide. I remembered the note: listen when it tells you where to look. I let my gaze drift, trying not to force it, just following the feeling the rhythmic sound evoked inside me. My eyes passed over the fireplace, the framed paintings, the doorway to the kitchen, and then settled on the archway leading into my grandfather's study. As my focus landed on the study, the rhythm of the chimes seemed to intensify slightly, the notes becoming infinitesimally clearer, pulling my attention like a physical string. I stood up, my own heart starting to beat in time with the clock's steady rhythm. I walked slowly towards the study, the brass key feeling heavy and significant in my palm. The moment I stepped over the threshold, the chiming stopped. The silence that rushed back in was not empty this time. It was expectant. The study was lined from floor to ceiling with books, thousands of them. It was my grandfather's sanctuary. But I wasn't overwhelmed. The clock's guidance had narrowed my focus. I felt an unexplainable pull towards the far wall, the one filled with nonfiction titles: history, science, philosophy. My eyes scanned the leather-bound spines until they landed on a complete 20-volume set of vintage encyclopedias from the 1950s. They looked untouched, more for decoration than for reading. Something about them felt right. I ran my fingers along the gold leaf lettering on the spines: V, W, X, Y, Z. When my hand touched the spine of volume T, for time, I thought with a small internal smile, I felt it. Not a keyhole, but a subtle give, a slight looseness to the book that the others didn't have. My breath caught. With trembling hands, I pulled the heavy volume from the shelf. It wasn't a book at all. It was a cleverly disguised box. The front cover swung open, and set deep within the hollowed-out pages was not a cavern of secrets, but a single ornate brass plate. And in the center of that plate was a keyhole, shaped in the unmistakable silhouette of a songbird with wings outstretched. It was a perfect match. I took a deep, steadying breath,
the rhythmic chiming of the clock still echoing in my mind, and inserted the key. It slid in with a smooth, satisfying precision. I turned it, and with a low, heavy thunk that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house, the entire bookshelf swung inwards, revealing a dark, narrow opening and a flight of stone steps leading down into the unknown.
For a moment that stretched into an eternity, I remained frozen on the threshold, my hand still on the key. The air that billowed out from the darkness was cool and ancient, carrying the scent of damp earth, cold stone, and something else I couldn't place, a faint, sterile, metallic tang, like the air after a lightning strike. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at me to slam the bookshelf shut, turn the key, and pretend none of this ever happened. But the curiosity, the desperate need to understand the man I thought I knew, was a far stronger force. My fingers fumbled along the stone wall just inside the opening until they found a switch. I flicked it. A string of bare, industrial-style bulbs flickered to life, illuminating a narrow, spiral staircase made of rough-hewn stone, descending steeply into the foundation of the house. It was a scene straight out of a Gothic novel, and yet it felt utterly real. Taking a shaky breath, I started my descent, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The walls were cold and slightly damp to the touch. With each step down, the familiar, comforting world of my grandfather's house receded, replaced by the profound, humming silence of his secret. The staircase opened up into a room that stole the air from my lungs. It was not the dark, forgotten cellar I had imagined. It was a large, dry, and brightly lit chamber that was part scientist's laboratory, part artisan's workshop, and part astronomer's observatory. It was meticulously, almost obsessively organized. One entire wall was a massive chalkboard, covered from top to bottom in complex equations and diagrams that looked like a blend of advanced physics and arcane sacred geometry. Celestial charts overlapped with intricate schematics of gears and crystalline structures. Another wall was lined with shelves holding hundreds of neatly labeled glass jars. Some contained shimmering mineral powders, others held geological core samples, and a few vials held liquids that pulsed with a soft internal luminescence. The air hummed with the quiet, latent power of a hidden electrical generator. In the center of the room, on a massive, heavy-topped workbench made of polished steel and oak, sat the heart of it all. It was covered by a large, dark velvet cloth. With a sense of reverence, I reached out and pulled the cloth away. The object beneath it defied categorization. It was a breathtakingly complex device of interlocking brass rings, spinning gyroscopes, and finely wrought silver wiring, all around a central, flawless quartz crystal the size of a human heart. It looked like an astrolabe built by a watchmaker for a wizard. Wires and delicate copper tubes snaked from its base, connecting to various gauges and oscilloscopes that seemed impossibly advanced for a man of my grandfather's generation. This was his secret. Not a hobby, but a life's work. My quiet, book-loving grandfather was a genius, a secret inventor, living a double life beneath the floorboards of his unassuming home. My eyes followed the thickest bundle of insulated cables leading from the base of the strange machine. They were fed neatly into a conduit that ran up the stone wall and through the ceiling, directly under where the living room should be. A jolt of understanding so sudden and powerful it almost brought me to my knees shot through me. The clock, the grandfather clock, wasn't the source of the magic. It was the speaker. It was the beautiful, unassuming wooden interface for this engine of secrets hidden below. The complex mechanism inside the device was translating some unseen information into a signal that triggered the chimes upstairs. The rusted, seized gears the horologist had seen were irrelevant. The clock wasn't telling time, it was being told what to say. Overwhelmed, I stumbled back and leaned against a workbench, my mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the deception, the sheer brilliance of the man I had only ever known for his gentle smile and love of crossword puzzles. My gaze fell upon a thick, leather-bound journal lying next to the machine, a pen resting beside it as if my grandfather had just set it down moments ago. His name was embossed in faded gold leaf on the cover. With trembling hands, I opened it.
The first page, in his familiar, elegant script, read, "Logbook for Project Echo, the Resonance Engine." I sank onto a stool and began to read, devouring page after page. It was all there, decades of research, theories, failures, and breakthroughs. My grandfather believed that objects, places, and even people retained a sort of energetic residue of significant events or strong emotions. He called them echoes. His life's work, this incredible machine, was built to do one thing: detect and interpret those echoes. He wrote that the engine could be tuned to the specific frequency of a lost object, sensing the residual energy of the owner's touch and frantic intention, and then translating that location data into a chime. It could resonate with the emotional imprint left on an old photograph, stimulating the corresponding neural pathways in the brain of the person holding it and bringing a buried memory to the surface. The lullaby, the car keys, the fountain pen, it all made a terrifying, brilliant kind of sense. The clock was his way of translating the silent language of the past into a sound I could understand. But as I flicked towards the final entries, the tone of the writing shifted. It grew more erratic, more obsessive. He wrote of a new theory, that if the echoes of the past were so strong, perhaps the echoes of events yet to come could also be detected. He was trying to tune the resonance engine to perceive the future. The last entry was chilling. "Pushed the amplification too far," he wrote. "The feedback loop is catastrophic. The core crystal is fractured on a quantum level. It's gone silent. Perhaps it's for the best. Some doors should remain locked. Some truths are not ours to know until their time has come." And that was it. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before his heart attack. He hadn't just died, he had broken his life's work, and perhaps himself in the process. I looked from the frantic final words in the journal to the magnificent silent machine on the workbench, its heart crystal now dark and inert. I finally understood everything. I had inherited not just a house, but a broken miracle, and the terrifying, unspoken question of whether it could or should ever be fixed.
The weight of my grandfather's journal felt heavier than any stone. I spent the next 2 weeks living a strange, bifurcated life. By day, I was in the world above, making phone calls, paying bills, and maintaining the illusion of normalcy. But as soon as night fell, I would descend the stone steps into his secret world. I didn't touch the resonance engine. Instead, I read. I absorbed every word of his journals, pored over every blueprint, and traced the lines of every equation I couldn't possibly hope to understand. I wasn't trying to learn how to fix the machine, not at first. I was trying to understand the man who built it. I saw his initial excitement, the pure scientific curiosity. I felt his profound grief after my grandmother passed away, a grief that twisted his research from a study of the past into a desperate grasp for the future. He wasn't chasing knowledge, he was chasing her. He wanted to know if she was okay, or perhaps even find an echo of her that was yet to come. His final, fearful entry wasn't a warning about the dangers of science, but a deeply personal admission of his own human frailty. He had learned, too late, that a heart cannot be guided by a compass that points to tomorrow. And in understanding his pain, my own feelings of loneliness in the house began to recede, replaced by a deep, empathetic connection to the grandfather I was only now truly getting to know. His final lesson became my mission. To try and replicate his future-seeking experiment would be to dishonor the very wisdom he'd gained at such a great cost. But to let his life's work, this broken miracle, crumble into dust felt like a different kind of betrayal. My purpose became clear. I wouldn't try to make it what it became, but restore it to what it was meant to be. A bridge to memory, not a window into destiny. I turned my focus to the early journals, to the pages filled with hope and meticulous notes on calibration. He wrote that the core crystal, the engine's heart, had been energetically detuned by the feedback loop. It wasn't physically broken, but its resonant frequency was now chaotic. To fix it, he wrote, the engine needed a resonant anchor. It had to be recalibrated using an object imbued with a singular, powerful, and uncomplicated emotional echo. It needed a pure memory to remind it of its purpose.
I didn't have to think for long. I knew the exact memory. When I was 5, I had a terrible fever. For a week, my grandfather sat by my bed, and while I drifted in and out of sleep, he carved a small, smooth wooden robin for me. It was the most precious thing I owned. A few years later, it vanished. I'd been heartbroken, and we searched the house for weeks. The memory was a perfect blend of his love and my own sense of loss, a powerful, foundational echo of our bond. The problem was I still had no idea where the little wooden bird was. After decades, finding it felt impossible. But then I realized this was the entire point. I couldn't find it myself. I had to trust the engine, even in its broken state. I had to have faith in his creation. I went down to the workshop, took a deep breath, and placed my hand on the cold, inert crystal at the center of the machine. Following a procedure I'd found in the journal labeled primary diagnostic resonance, I closed my eyes and focused. I didn't think about the bird's location. I thought about its feeling. The smooth wood in my hand, the smell of sawdust on my grandfather's clothes, the overwhelming sense of comfort and safety his presence gave me. I poured every ounce of that pure childhood love into the machine. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum vibrated up my arm. A faint, flickering violet light ignited deep within the crystal. And from upstairs, faint and distorted, came a single, struggling chime. Bong. It was weak, but it was alive. A gentle, invisible pull tugged at my senses, a faint thread of connection leading me up the stairs, through the house, and towards the attic. I followed the feeling, which grew stronger with every step. It led me to an old sea trunk in the far corner, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside, tucked into the breast pocket of my grandfather's old folded army dress uniform, was a perfect little wooden robin. Tears streamed down my face as I carried the small totem back down to the workshop. It felt like he had led me there himself. I gently placed the bird into a small velvet-lined cradle right beside the main crystal, a designated spot for the resonant anchor. I found the recalibration sequence in the journal, a simple series of adjustments to the energy flow, and initiated it. The violet light within the crystal intensified, swirled, and then settled into a steady, warm, golden glow. The chaotic hum of the machine smoothed into a soft, rhythmic pulse, like a sleeping breath. And then, from the living room above, a sound drifted down the stone staircase. It was a clear, pure, and achingly sweet melody that filled the entire house. It was my grandmother's lullaby. The resonance engine was healed. The clock now speaks to me often in soft, gentle chimes. It never shows me the future. Instead, it helps me find the past. It will chime a short, happy tune, and I'll find a forgotten photograph in a book. It will play a few somber notes, and I'll be drawn to a letter I've never read before. I am no longer a lonely ghost in my grandfather's house. I am a caretaker, a guardian of his true legacy. The oppressive silence is gone forever, replaced by the beautiful, gentle echoes of a love that time, it turns out, could never truly erase.